The coffee at Hartley's diner was terrible, and Natalie Rowe knew it before she even ordered. She sat in the corner booth, the one with the torn vinyl that caught the hem of her coat every time she shifted, and watched the door. The laminated menu stuck to her fingers. The fluorescent light above her flickered every 40 seconds or so, which she'd already counted 3 times, because counting kept her from checking her phone. 22 dates. 22 men who had looked at her across tables exactly like this one, seen her sensible clothes and her no-brand purse and her hesitation when the check arrived, and decided, sometimes politely, sometimes not, that she wasn't worth a second dinner. To be fair, she had engineered every single one of those exits. Natalie was 39 years old, and she was the founder and CEO of Rowe Capital Partners, a private equity firm that managed slightly over $4 billion in assets. Her name appeared on Forbes lists she never read. She had an apartment on the Upper West Side with a view of the park she mostly saw through the window of a car she was always too busy to stop and look out of properly. She also had a theory. The theory had begun, as most of her better ideas did, with a data point. Specifically, her ex-husband, Gregory. Gregory had known from the beginning who she was, and Gregory had spent 6 years gradually becoming someone who let her pay for everything while believing it was his right to do so. He hadn't been cruel. He'd just been comfortable. The specific, suffocating comfort of a man who had quietly decided that her money excused him from becoming anything more than he already was. After Gregory, she'd tried dating honestly. She'd put her actual job on her profile. She'd let men take her to expensive restaurants and watch their posture change when they Googled her name in the parking lot. She'd listened to the way certain voices sharpened, the way certain questions turned from curiosity to calculation, so she'd stopped being honest. She told dates she worked in financial consulting, vague, uninspiring, and she paid nothing, ordered the cheapest thing, and let the moment of the check reveal everything she needed to know. It was, she told her friend Dana over the phone, not lying. It was auditing. Dana had said, "Natalie, that is absolutely lying." But Dana was happily married, and therefore Natalie had concluded, not a reliable authority on the matter. The 23rd man was 7 minutes late. She had already decided that if he was 10 minutes late, she was leaving. She had a merger call at 9 and a board deck that still needed 3 slides reworked, and a life that did not actually have room for someone who couldn't manage a 7:15 reservation. Then the door opened, and a man came in shaking rain off his jacket. A Carhartt that had seen better decades, not the kind people bought to look rugged, but the kind people bought 15 years ago and just never replaced. He was somewhere around 50, maybe a few years past it, with close-cropped gray at his temples and the kind of face that had been weathered by something more specific than age. He looked around the diner once, found her, and walked over without the performance of relief that a lot of men did when they'd made someone wait. "You're Natalie," he said. "Not a question. I am. You're Owen Hartwell." He sat down, hung his jacket on the hook at the end of the booth, and picked up the menu. "Sorry I'm late. There was a thing with a freight elevator on 43rd that I couldn't leave until it was handled." "What kind of thing?" "The kind where it stops between floors with a person in it." He said it flatly, like it was a fact and not a story. "I'm a building engineer, maintenance supervisor, technically. The Alderton building, the one near Grand Central." She waited for him to add something, to inflate it in some way, the way people did when they felt their job wasn't impressive enough for a first date. He didn't. He just looked at the menu. The waitress came. He ordered coffee and the meatloaf special without looking up. Natalie ordered the soup she always ordered at diners, the one that was hard to get wrong. "So," he said after the waitress left, "what do you do?" "Financial consulting." Her standard line, delivered smoothly. "Mostly boring. Boring's underrated," he said, and something in the evenness of it made her glance at him more carefully. He wasn't being dismissive. He seemed to mean it. They talked. That was the surprising part. Not that they made conversation, because she was good at conversation, had been trained in it the way people were trained in anything they needed to survive, but that it happened without effort. He asked questions and then listened to the actual answers. He talked about the building, not in a way that complained, but in a way that was precise, like someone who found genuine interest in how systems worked. He mentioned without ceremony that his son was 15, and that the freight elevator situation had required a call to clarify pickup arrangements. "His mom?" she asked. Not in the picture, he said. Hasn't been for a while. She didn't press. The way he said it closed no doors. It was just a fact, laid down without bitterness or performance. The check came. Owen Hartwell looked at it, reached into the back pocket of his jeans, and pulled out a wallet that had been folded so many times it had creased through the leather. He counted out bills, actual cash, not a card, without apparent hesitation or show. He left a tip that was, she noted, more generous than the service had warranted. "You didn't have to," she started. "I asked you to dinner," he said, as though that were the entire explanation, which apparently for him it was. She walked home in the rain because the walk was only 12 blocks and she needed to think. Her phone had 4 unread messages from her assistant and 1 from Dana that said only, "Well." She didn't answer any of them. The second date was a Thursday 3 weeks later. She'd made him wait, not deliberately, not as a test this time, but because the Singapore deal closed on a Wednesday and she hadn't slept more than 4 hours, and her assistant Britt had nearly wept with relief when the wire confirmation came through. Owen had texted once at 7, running a few minutes early. No rush, that was it. No followed-up message. No performance of patience designed to make her feel guilty for the delay. They went to an Italian place on Lexington that was not expensive. Not the kind of not expensive that was trying to be charming, but the kind that had been there since 1987 and simply hadn't updated its prices to match the neighborhood. Owen had suggested it. She'd looked it up and found a Yelp page with 4.2 stars and a review that said, "The linguine is the same as it was when my grandmother brought me here in 1994, she'd thought. This is a man who knows what he likes and doesn't see the need to perform otherwise. Over dinner he mentioned, without particular emphasis, that his son's name was Cooper, that Cooper was playing varsity lacrosse and was passably good at it, but really wanted to be a sound engineer, which Owen thought was probably a fine thing to want at 15. "Are you worried about it?" she asked. "About what?" "The sound engineering, the practicality of it." He considered this with the seriousness the question deserved. "I figure," he said, "that if I spend his whole adolescence telling him to be practical, he'll end up practical and resentful. I'd rather he figure out what he's actually built for." A pause. "Besides, I know a guy who runs a recording studio in Hoboken. I've been working on the building's electrical system for 12 years. I told him about Cooper. He said, 'Come by sometime.' It was such a specific, quiet thing to have done. Not the announcement of a favor, but the actual doing of it, behind the scenes, without drama, that Natalie found herself looking at her plate for a moment. She thought about Gregory, who had waited for the world to accommodate him, and had eventually decided the world owed him that. "That was good of you," she said. "It's just being a dad," Owen said, and shrugged and moved on to something else. On the way out, she reached for the check. He shook his head. "Next one's yours. This one's mine." She didn't argue. It wasn't that she couldn't afford it. Obviously, she could afford it. Obviously, she could have bought the building the restaurant was in. But because there was something in the statement that was not about money at all. It was about sequence. It was about the assumption that there would be a next one. She found she liked that. The third date, he brought Cooper. It hadn't been planned. She'd arrived at the dim sum place in Flushing, another of his suggestions, unpretentious in the best way, and found Owen at a round table with a teenage boy who was trying visibly to look like he didn't care that he was on his father's date. "I'm sorry," Owen said. His practice got canceled. "I didn't want to reschedule on you. I should have called." "It's fine," she said, and meant it more than she expected to. Cooper Hartwell was lanky and suspicious in the way of 15-year-old boys who have learned that the world occasionally disappoints and are still deciding how to feel about that. He had his father's eyes, the same watchful quality, the same absence of performance. He ordered 3 plates without asking for permission, and then looked at her like he was daring her to comment. She didn't comment. She ordered 2 more plates herself and watched something in his posture ease very slightly. "Dad says you work in finance," he said. "Flat, neutral, testing. Something like that," she said. "Is it interesting?" "Sometimes. Mostly it's about paying attention to what other people overlook." He considered this. "Like what?" "Like companies that are actually good at what they do, but haven't told the right story about themselves yet. So you find them, and help them get bigger, or help them find the right partner. Depends on the situation." Cooper nodded slowly, in the way of someone filing information without committing to a verdict. He ate his hargao with the focused efficiency of an athlete who had learned that food was fuel, then looked up. "Do you make a lot of money?" "Cooper," Owen said, quiet. "It's a fair question," Natalie said, and she looked at Cooper steadily. "I do okay." He held her gaze for a beat, then returned to his food. Later, when Owen had gone to the counter to argue gently about the bill, which she had quietly beaten him to, Cooper leaned across the table and said, in a voice designed to travel only to her, "He doesn't do this a lot. The date thing. Just so you know," she said. "I know. How do you know?" She thought about it. "Because people who do this a lot have a kind of ease about it that looks relaxed but isn't. He's actually relaxed." Cooper stared at her. Then he said, "Huh," and went back to his spring rolls. 6 weeks later, she told Dana. They were on the phone at 11:30 at night, which was when Dana called when she had something to say that couldn't wait for a reasonable hour. "Tell me about him," Dana said. Natalie was sitting on her floor, the good hardwood that she'd paid obscene money for during the renovation she hadn't had time to enjoy, with her back against the couch and a glass of wine she'd been nursing for an hour. "He's a building engineer. 51. Has a son and nothing. Dana, he's just exactly what he presents himself as. There's no gap between the outside and the inside." She paused. "I don't know what to do with that." "What do you mean you don't know what to do with that? You like it." "I know I like it. That's the problem." Dana waited. This was one of the things Natalie most valued about her. She understood that some silences were people finishing their own sentences. "He doesn't know," Natalie finally said. "Oh, a beat. How much doesn't he know?" "All of it. He thinks I'm a mid-level financial consultant. He has no idea about the firm, the fund, any of it." The silence on Dana's end had a different quality this time. "Natalie, I know. How long has this been? 11 weeks. Natalie, I know, Dana. That's not a test anymore. That's a secret." She didn't answer, because Dana was right, and knowing Dana was right and being willing to do something about it were, she had learned, 2 different categories of problem. It unraveled on a Saturday. Not because of anything she did, because of a photograph. They were in Riverside Park. Owen had suggested a walk, which turned out to be one of the things he did on Saturdays, walk in Riverside Park, the kind of ordinary Saturday habit that Natalie had somehow never built for herself, and a woman stopped them near the 79th Street boat basin. Mid-50s, silk scarf, the particular posture of someone who had lunch with other people who had particular postures. "Natalie Rowe," the woman said, with the smooth delight of someone encountering a useful connection. "I was just reading the piece about the Meredith acquisition in the Journal yesterday. Are you still looking at the retail vertical, or is that wrapped up?" The world did not actually go quiet. Traffic kept moving. Dogs kept walking their owners along the river path. But she felt something shift, the way a building shifts before an earthquake, imperceptible to everyone else. "Eleanor," she said, and produced a smile. "Good to see you. We're actually in the middle of something. I'll have Britt reach out this week." Eleanor, the woman, not the name, which didn't matter, was well trained enough to understand a dismissal dressed as a promise. She moved on with a pleasant nod. Natalie did not look at Owen. He was quiet for perhaps 100 yards of path, which was long enough that she knew he'd processed what he'd heard. "Rowe Capital Partners," he said eventually. Not a question. "Yes, the article she mentioned. Yes." He stopped walking. She stopped too, and turned to face him, because she owed him that. Owen Hartwell looked at her with the expression of a man who was doing arithmetic. Not fast arithmetic, the kind people did when they were making accusations, but the slow kind, the kind where you were trying to understand how something actually worked. "How long?" he said. "Since the beginning," he breathed out. Just the one breath, slow and controlled, and she thought, this is what he does when something breaks that he has to fix. He assesses before he reacts. "What are we talking about?" he asked. His voice was careful. "Not Forbes list small, actually big. The fund manages a little over $4 billion. He didn't blink. She watched him not blink, and understood that part of him was recalibrating the entire previous 3 months, and that she had caused that, and that there was no version of this conversation in which she wasn't the one who had done the causing. "Was any of it real?" he asked. The question hit different than she expected. Not "why did you lie," which would have been about her, but was any of it real, which was about them. "All of it," she said. "Owen, every single—" "You let me pay for dinner," he said. "You let me think." He stopped. Started again. I have one pair of good shoes. I wore them on our second date because I wanted to make a decent impression. And I came home and I polished them for the first time in probably 3 years. And I thought, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I know, she said. Do you? The coldness in it was not anger. Anger would have been easier. It was the specific cold of a man who was deciding whether something he'd trusted had actually existed. I need you to hear me, she said. Not the explanation. I know the explanation sounds like justification, and maybe it is, but I need you to hear what was actually true. I was afraid. I have spent years watching men decide who I am based on a number in an article, and I didn't want to be that number for you before you got a chance to decide who I was first. He looked at her for a long time. That's a real thing, he said finally. I hear that. I do. He looked out at the river. But here's the problem, Natalie. I wasn't one of those men, and you never gave me the chance to show you that. She didn't have an answer for that, because it was true in a way that her explanation didn't cancel out. I need some time, he said. He walked home. She stood on the path for a while, with the river moving the way rivers move, indifferent, continuous, and thought about the specific arrogance of building a test for someone who had already been passing without knowing he was being evaluated. Cooper called her 9 days later. She almost didn't pick up. She didn't recognize the number, and she was between calls, and she had a rule about unknown numbers during business hours. But something, maybe the area code, maybe just the particular quality of a Tuesday afternoon that had already been long, made her answer. This is Cooper, he said. Hartwell, Owen's son. She sat up straighter. He didn't ask me to call. He doesn't know I'm calling. A pause. He's not eating a lot. He's been to work every day, so it's not like I'm not saying he's like not okay. He's okay. He's just. Another pause, the kind that teenagers made when they were reaching for a word they'd decided was too much. He was happier before. She closed her eyes. He's not the kind of guy who shows up somewhere and says he wants another chance, Cooper continued. He's not going to do that. I just thought you should know that the reason he's not doing that isn't because he doesn't want it. The line was quiet. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because I watched you order extra plates without asking permission, he said. And I watched you beat him to the check without making a thing of it. And I've met the other women he's gone out with, not many, but some. And they were all. He stopped, reconsidered. They were trying to be what they thought he needed. You were just, I don't know, you were just there. She thought about that for a long time after he hung up. She went to the Alderton building on a Wednesday morning. Not to the management office. Not with an appointment. She went to the building entrance at 7:15, which she knew from memory was when the overnight crew handed off to the day shift, and she waited. Owen came through a side door in his work clothes, the Carhartt again, boots with the steel toe she'd only noticed because she'd noticed everything, a clipboard he was marking something on. He saw her before she said anything and stopped. She didn't have a speech. She'd written one, and then she'd deleted it, because everything she'd tried to write sounded like a press release, and what she owed him was not a press release. I need to say something, she said, and I'd like to finish before you respond. He waited. That was all, just waited. What I did was wrong, she said. Not because it was deceptive, though it was. Because it was unfair to you specifically. I built a test around an assumption about who you were before I had any evidence to support it, and you never gave me any evidence to support it. Every single thing you did told me you were exactly who you said you were. And I kept testing anyway because I was scared. And being scared is real, and it's mine to own, and it's also not your problem to fix. She breathed. I'm not asking you to trust me again. That's not something anyone gets to ask for. That's something people have to earn, slowly, over a lot of time, and I understand if you don't want to give me the time to earn it. But I wanted you to know that the person who had dinner with you in that terrible diner on a Tuesday in November was me. The actual me. Not a performance, not a version. Just me, scared and trying too hard and completely unprepared for how straightforward you turned out to be. Owen Hartwell looked at her for a long moment. The morning traffic moved behind her. A delivery truck idled at the curb. Somewhere above them, the Alderton building hummed and breathed the way large buildings did, the infrastructure of it invisible to most people, visible to him. I know, he said. She blinked. What? I know it was you. He tucked the clipboard under his arm. You think I couldn't tell? You paid attention to things that someone performing a character doesn't pay attention to. You remembered that Cooper mentioned Hoboken 2 conversations later and asked about it. You eat soup because you actually like soup, not because it's cheap. A pause. I knew it was you. I just didn't know what you were protecting yourself from, and now, she asked. He was quiet for a moment, the good kind of quiet, the kind that wasn't absence of answer but presence of thought. I need you to not do that again, he said. Not the hiding. The deciding for me who I'm going to be before you've asked. I know, and I need you to understand that I'm not going to become someone different because of what I know now. I'm still the same person who polished a pair of shoes. I know that too, she said. That's why I'm here. He nodded just once in the way of someone accepting a term sheet they'd read carefully enough to mean it. I have a shift at 7:30, he said. I know. I'll let you go. She turned to leave. Natalie. She stopped. There's a food hall on Vanderbilt that opened last fall, he said. The banh mi place is actually good. I've been meaning to try it for lunch. She turned back. When? Friday. 12:30. You're going to let me pay, she said. Not because of anything else. Just because it's my turn. The corners of his eyes moved the way they did when he was about to disagree and had decided it wasn't worth it, and then he said, Fine. Friday. He went back through the side door, and she stood on the sidewalk while the city moved around her, ordinary and enormous and entirely indifferent to what had just happened, and understood, for the first time in a long time, that ordinary was not the opposite of enough. It was, in fact, exactly what she'd been looking for all along.